Welcome to Terror at Collinwood. Happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, whatever you celebrate. I'm so happy you could join us for this special Yuletide celebration because my guest today is the amazing David Henesy. Yes, you heard me. Now, before we get to the show, I want to remind you that if you're listening to this program on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please leave a rating. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts specifically, please also leave a review if you can. Regardless of which podcast app you're listening on, if there's a rating option, please do leave a rating. That really helps the podcast out a lot, especially on Apple Podcasts. It's really key. And if you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, and leave a comment. That would really be appreciated. It helps the YouTube version of the podcast to reach more viewers. That's how the algorithms work on YouTube. If the video isn't getting enough likes, it's not going to get seen as much. And whether you listen on one of the podcast apps or whether you watch the show on YouTube, thank you so much. I really and truly appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching the show, for listening to the show, and for joining me on this ride through the dark shadows. Now then, I'm rearing to get to this show because, wow, David Henesy. So he's here. He has some incredible things to tell us about. And with that said, let's get to the show. There's nowhere to run, there's no place to hide. This podcast is fun, but there are spoilers inside. Welcome to Terror at Collinwood. 'Tis I, your hostess, Penny Dreadful, aka Danielle, and I am delighted, thrilled, ecstatic even, to be joined by the one and only David Henesy. David is the owner of La Factoria, imported specialty foods where sustainability is key. He is the CEO of Panama Botanicals, which focuses on cacao to chocolate production, but has also expanded significantly into dried fruits, with markets that span across Europe, Asia, South America, and the USA. Panama Botanicals employs organic practices whenever possible and embraces regenerative approaches that enrich the ecosystems involved in production. In addition, David is a skilled actor who, as a child, appeared on Broadway with Mary Martin in the musical Jenny, was featured in the touring production of Oliver, and appeared in many print ads and commercials. He is, of course, beloved by Dark Shadows fans worldwide for his portrayals of David Collins, Daniel Collins, Jamison Collins, Parallel Time Daniel Collins, and Tad Collins. And he also appeared in House of Dark Shadows as a version of David. Welcome to the show, David. It's such a pleasure to have you here.
Great, Danielle. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, my goodness. Well, I want to first thank our mutual and amazing friend, Catherine Lee Scott, for connecting us, and also John Logan for suggesting to Catherine that we do this episode. So, and I know you're a really busy guy, so it means a lot that you're taking the time to do this.
No, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to share our experiences.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Yeah, Katie Scott is quite remarkable. She's got a lot of energy.
I call her a dynamo.
Yeah, she's a dynamo.
So
she's been single-handedly, I think she's the person most responsible for keeping the whole spirit of Dark Shadows history alive. And she's the one who maintained contact with everybody. And God bless her. Truly, it's a lot of work.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. She just posted a picture a couple of weeks ago of her with Kate Jackson at the Chiller convention. They were both there. So that was really cool to see them there together. Yeah. But yeah, so I want to just, first wish everyone happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, whatever you celebrate, because this episode is going to be going out just before the holiday season or during the holiday season. And I know you're down there in Panama, and you've been down there for quite a while there with your family, and you're very inspiring, and much like Catherine, in that whatever you set your mind to, because of your skill and your talent and your passion for what you're doing, you've become a very successful restaurateur and distributor, importer. I mean, this is just amazing what you've been doing. And I love watching your Instagram videos and seeing the pictures that you post on Instagram of all these delicious foods. So before we talk about the past, I want to talk about what's going on now. I know that you have been working and talking to the illustrious Patrick McRae, he's been on this podcast quite a few times about doing a biography, which is really cool. Can you talk a little bit about that? Is that something that's
it's an idea. It's an idea. As you know, I have an expression that I've used a lot. Let's let the ideas turn into deeds. But it's easier to think about than to do. It takes a lot of time
Mhm.
and intellectual and emotional energy also to dig back. I've been blessed with a very good memory. I mean, I have a very detailed memory of my childhood and most of my experiences. So it's going to be quite serious work to
Yeah,
do. It won't be light. It'll be quite intense. It's all pleasant. Fortunately, I've been very lucky in my life. So
yeah.
yeah, we are talking, and we'll see if we can bring that to fruition.
Absolutely. Yeah, let me know and I'll be happy to announce it here. And
Thank you.
oh, sure. I know folks are going to really be excited to
We
hear
don't want
that.
to do another, child actor book. So it's
Right.
trying to find a way of mixing the business life, and I've lived in 6 different countries and
Wow.
have kids all over the place,
How many
and
kids do you have?
five.
Five
One
kids.
in between California and New York, one in California, one in Munich, and 2 here in Panama.
Oh, wow. Are you get together for the
Oh
holidays or?
yeah. Oh, we're very close.
Oh, wonderful. Oh, good, good.
There's always somebody who's sort of misses out, but no, we are in communication almost daily,
That's
with
great.
the wonders of WhatsApp and email. So
I was going to say, WhatsApp is such a great thing to connect people all over the
it's
world.
very it's
WhatsApp.
used it's exclusively in it's the only messaging app that people use in South America
Mhm.
and more in Europe.
Yeah.
A lot of business is done that way.
Yeah,
So
I have a friend in Finland who uses he's really into WhatsApp. I've communicated with him a few times that way. But let's talk about La Factoria and which everyone should check out the website lafapa.com, LAFAPA.com, and Panama Botanicals. I really appreciate your dedication to sustainability and just being environmentally conscious, which I think we really need these days, especially. So talk a little bit about Panama Botanicals and
that
your.
part, sure, very easy. When I was going to school in New York City,
Mhm,
uh, in the 60s, working on Dark Shadows, I went to a high school, an elementary school called Professional Children's School, which was always very liberal in its approach to education. So as a result, it was also the 60s. So the world was very liberal. And I remember being completely impressed by the first Earth Day.
mhm,
And there was a tremendous demonstration in Central Park on the first Earth Day. And it really it made a lot of sense to me to start thinking seriously about protecting the planet. And uh, in those days, it was still pretty, slash and burn commerce, and deforestation was what people did. So at a young age, I was really disturbed by the decimation of forest, but thank God, just about at that time, reforestation started to happen, and I became aware of how paper companies were regenerating their stock. And then when we ended up building a restaurant in Panama, so this is a jump all the way up into the 90s, we were lucky enough to have worked on a project for a person who was building a research laboratory. He was funding a research laboratory for the Smithsonian Institution of Washington, D.C., who have a branch here. So at that point, we started working with him, and he was acquiring land in parts of Panama that had been devastated to make pasture land for livestock. So it was a very clear task, and it was very identifiable what had to be done. It was to convert pasture land back into forests using indigenous varieties to encourage the development of indigenous ecosystems, the bugs, the birds, and the four-footed animals that were disappearing because of the destruction of their habitat. So when we built our first restaurant, we had all of the people that we'd been working on with reforestation from around the world, including Yale University Forestry School, pretty significant institutions and pretty sophisticated people in the milieu. We learned quite a lot and took it very seriously. So when we opened our first restaurant, we decided to mitigate our carbon footprint. This is back in 2001, 2002. We decided to mitigate our own carbon footprint by involving ourselves in reforestation. That's called a carbon offset. When you use gas and gasoline to operate a business, you have two options. One is to eliminate the use of fossil fuels, which is kind of hard, can't cook very well in a city restaurant without gas. So we would try to offset the damage we did by doing the good, by planting trees, indigenous species. So we got involved with a German group who were growing very quickly at that point, and that is 24 years ago. And today, we still work with that group, and we're growing cacao, which is cocoa beans in Bocas del Toro with them. They actually put together a fund where they raised the money to acquire plantations and build post-harvest processing facilities. And it's all sustainable. It's agro-reforestation because you are growing trees in, it's not a monoculture, meaning if you grow only one product, you deplete the soil and don't contribute too much. But so this is, cacao is grown with bananas, plantains, and autochthonous species, indigenous species of trees. So we still do that. The sustainability thing started at a young age. We haven't given it up. It's something we do. We don't publicize it that much. It's mentioned on my LinkedIn page. It's mentioned on a website. But it's really something we do for ourselves. But it's kind of unusual to have been a carbon neutral restaurant for almost 20 years.
I wish more restaurants would take inspiration from you and do
They
this.
are. It's nice to see. I don't know now with the new administration we have coming into Washington, whether the strides that have been taken over the last 20 years will continue at the same pace. I know there's a lot of speculation and cynicism about global warming, but we see it.
I'll tell you, I teach college is my day job. I teach English, and I get frustrated sometimes with some of my students. I mean, they're young, but some of them, for the most part, they're on board. They understand the evidence, etc. But some of them are just very, they think it's a hoax kind of a thing,
Right.
And so I try to incorporate, show some documentaries and things like that to show kind of what's going on, to try to at least get it in their heads that, this actually is a thing that's happening. That's very problematic. So
even if you dismiss the severe weather patterns and find correlations in history, the rising sea level is undeniable.
Absolutely.
It's just fact. There are small islands that are disappearing in the Indian Ocean, and other places. So, But having said that, so we decided to stay on a very serious sustainability course. As a restaurant operator in the developing world, or it's not this is not New York. If you want ingredients that you take for granted in New York City, down to things as simple as what everybody uses now in their kitchen, kosher salt, we kind of had to import it ourselves. So
Mhm.
we started importing on a small scale. And of course, in keeping with our sustainability mission, we would deal with organic and family owned craft, handmade or hand where possible. A lot of people handmade things, can't export them.
Mhm.
But fortunately, in Europe, there are many, and now in the United States, there are many, many manufacturers of very high quality, organic, and sustainable and carbon neutral goods. So we focus on that. Um, as I mentioned earlier before the call, you're in a part of Massachusetts, which is known for its fishery, which has
Yeah.
been depleted tremendously since I was a boy and spent a lot of time in and around your region, all the way to Rhode Island, around South Dartmouth and Patenarum. And I know a lot of fishermen for a long time, and the depletion of the ocean fisheries was severe. So we only deal with companies that are very sustainable. If we deal with fish farms, they are farms that don't just overfeed the fish and allow the feed to rest on the bottom of the ocean floor, creating all kinds of imbalances and diseases. We deal with people who take it all very seriously. It makes it more expensive. It's more challenging, and it's doing the right thing. I'm going next week to Europe. I'm lucky from Panama. We have direct flights to Europe,
Yeah.
a couple of them every single day. So when I
Oh.
need to travel, and I am going next week to cover a whole bunch of bases. We also import wine from Italy mostly, and
Mhm.
the wines we import nowadays are almost all exclusively organic. Most winemakers of note and quality, and we focus on premium products. In order to be a premium product today, the practices for making great wine also intertwine with practices, sustainable practices. So we get natural wines and organic wines. So I travel a lot. That's a lot of fun. La Fapa is a website
Yeah.
that occurred during the pandemic. When the pandemic hit Panama, we were one of the first restaurants to actually take it seriously and shut down. We did not
Mhm.
want to expose our staff to an unknown set of pathogens. At those times, I just come back from a trip to Europe, and I just in ground zero of around Milan
Mhm.
in Italy,
Yikes.
which is
Wow. Yeah.
where the whole European collapse began.
Oh, yeah.
So when I came back, it was very serious for me. So we decided to shut down, and of course we had our storerooms and refrigerated rooms filled with product. So my son and I knocked together a website overnight on GoDaddy.
Huh.
Don't worry, I'm not getting paid by GoDaddy. Uh,
It's okay.
but we knocked together a commercial website to try and sell the stuff we had to
Yeah.
people who were, and it was quite remarkable. It was amazing.
Yeah.
As soon as we got the website up and running, orders started coming in. We didn't know what to do. It was
Uh-huh.
just the family, and we had one or two employees that could actually come. We were a business considered priority businesses, food.
Mhm.
So we were allowed to have employees, and we were allowed to function. But we went crazy. I mean, I was packing boxes from noon till midnight with my wife, Carolina, and Diego and Matilda, our little kids at
Uh-huh.
the time. It was quite interesting.
Yeah.
So that we started that website, and then we became more informed about e-commerce,
Mhm.
uh, and then we started talking to people about building a proper website, and that the budgets were all over the place. I mean, unbelievable. I was talking
Mhm.
to in those days, it was still a pretty exclusive area,
Mhm.
but we were very lucky because just at the same time, the trend was growing towards people doing their own websites, and we found another company,
Mhm.
and we did a contract with them. I was shocked about the costs, but it was
Mhm.
still a lot less than hiring an agency to do it for us. So we built our own website, and we still maintain it ourselves, and
Mhm.
we deal with some pretty exclusive products, pretty expensive, which you things generally cost 30-40% more here because of the cost of importation
I see. Yeah.
and duties. So that's what that company is. It's a lot of fun because they're upscale products, coincidentally upscale just because the people who tend to really care about the products they make appeal to a certain type of market,
Right.
and they work very hard, and that is the true luxury of today,
Mhm.
are very simple things that are very well made.
The La Factoria, so Panama
So
Botanicals is,
the way it works,
yeah.
we have a holding company. You know, we own some real estate. We were very lucky. We were able to buy the building where the restaurant is, and then we bought the lot next door over the years, and then we just bought another building next door. So we actually have a nice solid base.
Mhm.
Uh, Thinking of the retirement, which of course is never going to happen, but
Yeah, I can't imagine.
I'd like to imagine, but I can't even imagine imagining it. So the 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 company started really as a restaurant. Okay,
Mhm.
I've been in the restaurant business since I started cooking for the cast in my dressing room on Dark Shadows. I got
Yes,
excited
yeah.
about, you know, it's like, once a shark smells blood in the water. Um, I stayed in commerce from a very young age. I did it.
Yeah,
I finished high school barely in California. I left New York and I went to live with my sister in Malibu,
yeah.
California. I finished high school at Santa Monica High School, but coming from New York to California, I had more credits from my high school than I needed to graduate from high school in Santa Monica. So in my senior year, they said, okay, we don't have any more classes for you because you've taken French, you've taken the maths, you've taken sciences, you've taken everything that we can offer. But the law of California says you have to have 4 years of physical education. So my senior year, they told me I was going to spend the day hanging out at school, but I had to do one phys ed class a day. So I said, yeah, right. Yeah, that's going to happen. Uh, so I was very fortunate. My counselor said, you know what you can do? You can take one single course in the evenings
Uh-huh.
at Santa Monica College. So I enrolled in Santa Monica College as an adult education target because they don't like dropouts. So I went to Santa Monica College and I took creative film and political science, and I can't even remember what else it is. But I did one semester and bam, they gave me my high school diploma.
That's great. Wow.
So I finished high
Yeah.
school, and at that time I was self-sufficient. I was able to collect unemployment
Uh-huh.
from New York City. It was
Oh,
really
okay.
funny to go to the unemployment office in Santa Monica, California, where I would see very famous people. Tuesday Weld, I don't know if anybody remembers the actress. Um, Amazing people waiting in the unemployment office because you had to go every day and prove that you'd been looking for work and
Right.
stand online and to get a check, and it was quite something. So I was I needed to feed myself, so I got involved in business very early, and I manufactured craft goods along with a couple of hippie guys in Malibu
Uh-huh. How
making
old were
leather
you at
goods.
this point?
16,
16. Wow.
16, and 17.
Uh-huh.
Then we were selling in a craft fair in Westwood near the UCLA
Mhm.
campus. So I started, banking and buying raw materials and buying tools and hiring people and paying. And then we were working out of a garage until the building inspector came and said, you can't run a business out of a garage. So you have to get a business license. So I learned about getting, so to get a business license, you have to comply with the engineering and codes, civil codes
Yeah.
so we had to upgrade the garage, and then I learned business by
Yeah.
doing it, then
Yeah. Yeah.
going to the bank, and then one day we actually needed money to buy some raw materials because we had a Christmas contract to fulfill. I went to the bank and I said, I don't have enough money to buy the raw materials. I said, well, that's what banks do.
Yeah.
We we'll we'll lend you, and I think it was $500 that we
Uh-huh.
borrowed commercially, but we'd been at the bank for like 2 years already, so they knew that we were somewhat serious. It's been a ride and just didn't
Yeah.
stop.
That's
Didn't
amazing. And then
stop.
you went back to New York and opened a restaurant in New
Went
York.
back to New York. The man who had the most influence on me was the boyfriend of my mother's best friend. So this fellow was a man named Claude Philippe. Claude was the banquet manager of the Waldorf Astoria in New York during the late 40s, straight through until the 60s, which made him a very, very important man.
Mhm.
The Waldorf was the social center of New York City in terms of all international activities. Everybody would use the Waldorf was the number one hotel. Um, and he was a Frenchman with a lot of style. He had a house in the country that we used to spend weekends at, and he had wine. He had an incredible house. The house was a Revolutionary War outpost for the U.S. Army.
Mhm.
At the time, of course, it was a George Washington slept here kind of place, but it had a lot of outbuildings, and he had barns, and he had Black Angus cattle, and I learned to drive a tractor, and so it was very cool. So that man influenced me in terms of food and wine because we had wine and cheese and great foods. He had an industrial restaurant kitchen in his house, the country. So I learned, oddly enough, the only the only taping of The Dark Shadows that I missed, except for the time that I broke my leg and I was in the hospital,
Right.
uh, was a snowstorm. We were on a week up in the country, Peekskill, just an hour outside of New York, less than an hour. There was a blizzard, and we couldn't get back into the city. The show was actually taped on a Monday, but I was absent, so I had to tape my scenes the next day and
Oh,
the day
wow.
after, and they had to edit them back into the show. So I got into food and beverage. I got into, when I went to California, I sort of this is a big jump in years. I'm going from the
Mhm.
60s back to now the 70s, and I came back to New York.
Yeah.
I went to this fellow Claude and said I want to be in the hotel business, and he said, what do you base that on? I said, well, because I've been watching you all these years. He said, oh, you think it's that easy? He said, get out of my office, go and find yourself a job, learn something about the food and beverage industry, and then we'll talk.
Uh-huh.
And I was shocked. I thought he was going to welcome me and give me a job and
Hmm.
send me in a training program at the Waldorf or
Yeah.
Europe or
Right.
so. Literally leaving that office, I went uptown to where I was living on the Upper East Side, and we knew somebody who owned a restaurant, a little hamburger place, and we talked to the guys who owned that, and they said, look, we're very busy. The waiters who work here, everybody who works here has been here for years, and they make a ton of money. Nobody's going anywhere. There's no jobs here, but there's a guy up the street who's opening a restaurant, and he'll be looking for people.
Hmm.
So I went up the street and I met the two partners who were building this little restaurant. One was a male model, and one worked for a magazine.
Hmm.
Uh, so they were opening a restaurant, and they needed staff. So they didn't know, that you weren't supposed to hire people with no experience.
Hmm.
So they were just dumb enough to hire me, and I learned from the other waiters that had more experience. I became a decent waiter, and then something broke in the basement. A pipe broke, and I figured out how to turn off the water so the basement didn't flood, and they promoted me to manager.
Wow.
So it was a battlefield. So
Yeah.
I stayed in the restaurant business. I managed. Again, like the blood in the water, the sharks go
Yeah.
crazy. Shortly after that, I had more experience with this same group building a new restaurant where I was in charge of the construction. So I learned more about New York City construction and building permits and dealing with Con Edison. And the institution was very, very, very difficult in those days.
I would imagine so in New York City. Gosh, yeah.
But you learn,
Yeah.
stress. If you have a discipline that you get from show business, which is you show
Yeah.
up, do the work, you learn your lines. It's just basic discipline, which we've been careful to instill in our 5 kids. They're all hardworking, successful at school. It's not rocket science.
Right.
Just
No,
focus and do your best.
yeah. No, you mentioned show business. I know, you left acting and you went into the restaurant business, but acting never left you,
Yeah.
because I mean, it's just an innate thing. And I was talking to John Logan, the screenwriter. I've had him on the podcast, and he said, make sure you tell David how good he was on Dark Shadows. And just everybody I've talked to, everybody just said, David Henesy is an excellent actor. And just when you came back to do that Dark Shadows Christmas Carol as Tiny Tim, which I was so delighted that you were Tiny Tim,
Thank you.
and you were
Perfect.
so good in that. And then just even your Instagram, videos, you're innately you're a performer. I don't think that ever left you. Did you continue? Do you continue at all to do any kind of theater or anything like that, or is it just
No,
no?
no, but the restaurant business, we're very visible
Yeah,
to our customers, so it's a constant show.
yeah,
And what I learned from show business, when I think about decorating and building a restaurant, what I
yeah,
learned from the movies and TV, the our designer for the Dark Shadows sets was a guy named Cy Tomashoff.
yeah.
And Cy was such an influence on me. I loved because we were spending time with this very elegant Frenchman who surrounded himself with beautiful things and this beautiful house. And, the library was stocked with beautiful books. And so
Mhm.
when I was on the set of Dark Shadows, I was not unfamiliar with the surroundings, opulent, thoughtful,
Sure.
a classy setup like Collinwood.
Yeah,
Uh, but Cy and watching the sets be constructed and changed and decorated, and when new sets would come, and they'd knock down the blue whale because it wouldn't be used for a couple of months, and then to have to set it back up again and redecorate and repaint. And I learned a lot of tricks for building restaurants. I've not
huh.
hired an interior designer except for architects to help me with technical things and the signatures on filings, or if I've had people, it's been a collaboration.
Mhm.
But it was all about getting things done quickly and effectively and for as little money as possible.
Yeah,
So I learned about that. That's part of the show business people don't know. There's a huge everything that goes on behind the scenes is so much bigger than the 30 minutes of the
sure.
broadcast or the 22 minutes of the interactions, personal. We were so lucky. We had a team of absolutely extraordinary, delightful, flawless group of people to work with as a kid,
Yeah,
on both sides of the camera, and remained friendly with Louis Edmonds
yeah.
until he died. We were in communication.
I love.
Jonathan and I have always, we were friendly, but I wasn't as close to Jonathan as I was to Joan Bennett, for example,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and Catherine, who was
Sure.
very sweet. And
I love
oh,
that familial quality has maintained through the year. I just had Jerry Lacey on the podcast yesterday. Actually, he's going to be the Thanksgiving episode, and I mentioned to him afterwards that I was going to be talking to you today, and he
he's a very
big
sweet guy.
smile.
Really
Yeah.
liked him a lot. He taught me how to do a Humphrey Bogart imitation, which I won't do. But
Next time, next time.
he was
Um,
doing a show on Broadway, and at night he was working on the show. He was taping in the
yeah,
day and working on a
that's
Broadway show at
remarkable.
night.
Play it again, Sam.
Yeah.
Your character, well, first of all, how did you had done Broadway? You had been with Mary Martin, who I love this
Okay,
Peter
here's the
Pan.
other story. Okay, this is going to be
Yeah.
the fun story. My mother was a model,
Uh-huh.
uh, a single mom. My mother and father divorced when we were small. We lived at the New Jersey shore at the beach,
Okay.
literally at the beach. And she would go into New York City every day, or at least 4 days a week, as a showroom model for Seventh Avenue clothing manufacturer. In those days, buyers would come from around the world, uh, Wanamakers, the guys from people from California. If they wanted dresses for their department stores or their boutiques, they had to go to New York and go to the showrooms and visit the manufacturers, and they would see live models in the clothes. And there was something called sample size, and you had to be that size. My mother was that size. So she was a model. And little by little, I mean, it's just complete fate or kismet, or she took the three of us with her one day to a place that was shooting catalogs for Sears and Roebuck. So the
Mhm.
first thing I did in like oh no, prior to that, 1959, a friend of hers was the director of commercials, somebody she knew from New York, was going to shoot a commercial for Sunbeam Bread, which was a competitor of Wonder Bread. It was a sort of Midwestern.
Yeah, I remember Sunbeam. Sure.
Sunbeam Bread was a bread, and he was shooting the commercial, and he said, "Hey, we're shooting next week, and I need a kid, David's age." So that was the first thing I did. Skipping through a field, picking dandelions, and then climbing in a tree, and then eating a sandwich, and that started. And next thing you know, we were taken to New York. It was very useful money, income. All of us were doing modeling at Pagano Studios, which was on 3rd Avenue and 65th Street. Would go and be shot for boys' clothes in the Sears and Roebuck catalog. And then another commercial, and then another commercial. And then I was missing school. So the school was complaining to my mother, and she said, "Okay, well, if you're going to be missing school, we might as well, take you to a school in New York." So I was enrolled at Professional Children's School, which oddly enough is across the street from where my son is now attending university.
Oh,
Fordham. He goes to Fordham Lincoln Center. So from his dorm room, he can see the roof of the school, of my elementary school.
Wow.
It's quite something. So while I was at school, one day, there was a kid in my class named Brian Chapin. Brian was they were rehearsing this show, Jenny with Mary Martin. And he said, "It's really funny, but they were asking me if I knew anybody," true story, "if I knew anybody could sing and dance and also be in the show." And I'm like, "Well, cool. I'm sure I can do it." So he and I actually, he conjured up this meeting with the stage manager during rehearsals of Jenny. I'm not sure how. I think his mother took me with him after school, and I met the stage manager, and they looked at me like, "Turn around, can you do a time step or whatever?" We had to do a little tap or a little dance, something which I could do. And I was hired.
Wow.
To be in a Broadway show. It's like,
that's amazing. Wow.
How did that happen? So
were you
now
super
I'm in a
excited
Broadway show. So now we're singing and dancing on Broadway, and then that show did not last long, but it was a wonderful experience.
You must have been super excited, I would imagine, to get cast in a Broadway show at that age.
Really, you don't have time to think about the excitement. It's really, you're doing the work, and you're learning how to be a professional, and you're watching the people, and you're, if you're not overly secure, you work harder. So I learned the skills that you needed to be a professional actor by watching professional actors.
What was Mary Martin like?
Oh, the most lovely. She's so a star. Truly, what they used in those days was just the word was pro.
Yeah,
that's the word that everybody used. That's a real pro.
Yeah,
she was extraordinary.
Wow,
funny, smart, talented, hardworking. Disciplined, thoughtful, presence for everybody all the time. Literally.
And then you also toured with Oliver. Were you one of Fagin's
right after that, I think at that point I finally had an agent, or my mother's agent said, "Hey, there's a touring company of Oliver. They really would love to have a parent with kids, so that you have a parent looking after kids on the tour, but also the parent is in the show." So my mother was in the chorus. And I was in the chorus, and my sister Sharon was also in the chorus.
Okay.
And so we spent nearly a year on the road. We went to 42 different states.
Wow.
I'd missed school for a year. I learned how to read on a bus. Didn't miss school because we had a violinist and the assistant director of the show were the tutors that we had for 14 kids. And we would set up classes every day in a hotel conference room and get the work done. Mail my schoolwork back to the school.
Wow.
PCS. They would mail us. We'd pick up mail in the next town, my assignments for the following month. It was quite something. So we did that, and I worked with Jules Munchin, who was an incredible actor from the 40s in Hollywood actor, very, very famous, wonderful guy who we're talking about spanning a guy who worked in vaudeville in New York in the teens and 20s, and to be around those people and to hear those stories as a
That's so
kid
cool. Yeah.
certainly impacts. Uh, so that's show business. Then Dark Shadows was also the same.
Yeah.
Kids met.
What was how did you
Serendipity.
get cast in that? Like, I mean, talk
The
about that
same.
Dark Shadows and
It
Dan
was almost,
Curtis.
it was almost the same. Dan Curtis was not a producer of television shows. He worked in the business side
Hmm.
of selling media time. He was a time salesman. He sold the commercial space on ABC, and he had this idea. I think he knew Art Wallace, who was the writer, conceived the show. Uh, Few people know that this really was based on uh, a, a film that he saw in a book, which was called The Turn of the Screw.
Hmm.
Turn of the Screw was about a couple of kids who were and a nanny in
Yeah.
England, and I don't think there were demonic possessions, but
It was ghosts. It was ghosts.
it
Yeah.
was ghosts. It was
Peter
ghosts.
Quint and Miss Jessel, the ghosts. Yeah. Yep.
So that was his concept, and he didn't have a production company. I remember there was a casting director called my mom, because again, there wasn't an agent in the middle. A casting director called my mom and said, "This is a show that sounds like it would be perfect for your kid." And there is a reading. There was not even an audition. There's
Uh,
they want, I can get him a reading. And I remember going to a an office building. My mother and I took the number 5 bus down Broadway, turns left on Central Park South, 57th Street. I remember getting off the bus at 6th Avenue and Central Park South and going to an office building. My mother let me go from the reception, uh, took me to the reception. "I'm David Henesy. I'm here." And they said, here's 3 pages of lines for you to read.
yeah.
And I went into a conference room or lawyer's office where it was Dan,
Hmm.
George DeCenzo, who was his assistant, Art Wallace, and the lawyer, and 3 pages. And there was no screen tests. I mean, it's just sit and read. So I
Hmm.
managed to, struggle through the 3 pages cold, but I had learned.
Hmm.
So I read the 3 pages of script, which was basically telling Victoria Winter, "I hate you," because she was the new nanny and she was, I suppose, the replacement to my mother. So
Yeah.
did the reading,
Yeah.
and then you go away and you don't hear anything, or you hear something, but that's a problem with show business, which is ultimately why I left. You go away, you go home, and we wait or don't wait. The best thing to do is just turn off the switch, and if something comes, it's great. But
Mhm.
I don't know, a week later, they called and said, "Okay, we're going to shoot on location, and David needs to be ready on Friday." And my mother's like, "Ready for what?" It's like, we had no contract, we had no agreement, we hadn't discussed, there was no agent, there was no. So we'll work it all out. And I remember sort of like that Friday night before the Monday we were supposed to go to Newport, Rhode Island to start shooting the location shots, the exterior shots. They sort of hammered out an agreement on the phone. This is no faxes, no, this is
Yeah.
like on the phone, an
Yeah.
agreement in principle. Yeah, yeah. And the next thing you know, on Monday, I'm 7 o'clock in the morning to
Wow.
pick me up. And I go with all these other people that I met them the very first time. It was Alexandra, Louis, not sure who else was in that car as we went
Well,
up
Bob
to.
Costello, I think, went.
Well, Bob Costello was the producer, and I guess I
Yeah.
met him the first time up
Yeah.
there.
Hmm.
I don't remember who was direct. I think Dan directed the exterior. I don't think we had Leela Swift or any
Hmm.
of the director yet. Um, and then the rest is just four
Was
and a
that
half
fun or
years
was
of four and a
yeah.
half. Yeah, of course it was fun.
Yeah.
It's great fun.
Yeah.
Dan had rented. Dan was very stylish. Dan Curtis rented a Mustang, a Shelby version of a Mustang fastback. I remember it was white with blue stripes, and he drove me around. He would pick me up at the hotel and drive me to the location every day in that car where
Wow.
we were shooting in Rhode
Yeah.
Island. I was just fascinated with the car and him.
He must have been quite the character to drive in the car with, I would
He was
imagine.
a very character. He was a very sweet guy. He was charming and strong, and
Mhm.
a very sort of, well, so slightly aloof
Uh-huh.
um, guy. He was the boss,
Yeah, yeah.
big
And
boss.
you started out your character, David, is clearly at least I think partly inspired by the Bad Seed, wrote a pen mark in the Bad Seed because you
Sure,
started
that's
out.
it with another fantastic film.
Yeah.
That's what they used to
Yeah.
call me at home.
So you brought some of that to David early on, and I think
Totally.
he was kind of a very troubled child and doing all these terrible things to poor Victoria Winters. But like in Dark Shadows, there's always that sort of redemption arc for many characters, including David, Barnabas, Quentin, Angelique, all these characters that start out kind of antagonistic go through these changes in the show, and David was one of the first, I think, because he's doing these bad things, but then it's the great sequence with Laura Collins, Diana Malay, your mother, who's the Phoenix, and she wants to take you into the flames, and David has to decide between Victoria Winters and going into the flames with his supernatural mother, and it's a heart-wrenching scene, and you're crying and you're not sure what to do, and it was beautifully
All of this,
played. Yeah,
all of this in a daytime TV show.
you're right. Yeah,
Amazing.
yeah,
They
yeah.
really did. The number of people who were influenced by that show is remarkable.
Oh, totally.
Remarkable.
Many,
Anne
many
Rice,
people.
I think is her name, the
Yeah.
vampire. She said very clearly in an early interview, she said, I got into vampires because of Dark Shadows.
Oh, so one of the interview with the vampire, they did that in Dark Shadows. Barnabas is locked in the coffin, and the writer is trying to interview him to get his life story. Clearly, there's some inspiration there for sure.
Johnny
Um,
Depp was also inspired by it.
yes, yeah, yeah, yeah. I wish the film had been done more seriously. How does it feel seeing other people play your character that you originated? Have you seen any of those versions?
No, I would oddly, I don't really pay that much attention
Yeah.
to it because, they're remakes of something that was so flawed but
Uh-huh.
special, but
What?
you cannot,
You can't
there's no
recapture it.
way of
Yeah.
reproducing the energy and the interaction, the synergies of the
Man,
style of the individuals we had. You can't do it.
the
There's
actors you
no
had
way.
on the show, this is something that comes up often in this podcast, and people are going to beat me up for not asking every question they want me to ask. David only has a certain amount of time, so I'm going to ask what I can. But um, one character you played that comes up often, in addition to David, is you played Jamison Collins, and there's one sequence in the show where your character becomes possessed by Count Patofi, which was Thayer David's character. And he's often listed as one of my favorite versions performances on the show. You were sensational, basically channeling Thayer David's character and playing that character. Did you sit down with Thayer David to talk about, playing that role, or did you just kind of watch him and
Nah, we
do your
just
own
did it.
version?
We just did it. The minute I remember, it involved a gloved hand.
Yes. Yep.
So, the minute the glove was on the hand, it was like channeling happened. Maybe the spirit was, in fact, or it was, no, but but that's how we had so much fun. And we were given so much latitude.
Mhm.
We weren't given. The only way you can do a show that complex and with that much nuance once a day, getting the script the evening before, blocking and
Yeah.
you know uh, setting up a show from scratch daily is if you're given a lot of. You're not given. It's a necessity.
Yeah.
Nobody taught you how to act. Nobody. The direction wasn't directing. It was more mechanical and where to be and how to hit your mark and the lighting and the shot than getting you to work on a reading of a line ever.
Yeah.
I don't
Well,
remember
there's a
a single
spontaneity
time.
there, right? I mean, it's a spontaneity and that creativity with all these, talented people all kind of coming together to do this every day. That comes across, I think.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure. And everybody was the characters were meaty, so it was easy to assume. It was easy to get
Sure.
into character. And of course, everybody was professional. I mean, the newest people, I had more experience than David Selby and
Sure.
Katie Scott. I'd been in the business for, so, I remember saying, "Look, I've been in this business for 10 years, so like,
Yeah.
give me a break."
A few a few of the actors from the show I've had on, like Sharon Smith, and a few other folks.
Adorable. She was fun. We had a lot of fun
Oh
together.
yeah, yeah. I'm sure you did, and but I heard you've pulled some pranks sometimes on the set. Do you ever have
More
any?
than once. More than once. I would always, I was into magic, so I would go to a magic place on the weekends and get pranks and tricks. I'm a
Yeah.
store that sold all kinds of goofy things. I did like to. There were always coffins on the set.
Yeah.
I'd really like to, have people wonder which coffin I was hiding in. Truly, I would just get in and close the top and be thrilled.
Did you
Or,
take a nap in there, or you're just like
well,
waiting for
it's
somebody to
rumored that
find?
I took a nap. There was no napping ever, but
You're just
definitely.
wait hiding out. Yeah. Um.
No, it was a very busy
Sure.
time, and everybody hit their marks.
Yeah.
There was a lot of trouble with lines. People, it's impossible to. We had scripts. I remember getting the script, and I would look, and it gave me so much work.
Mhm.
I constantly had these, long speeches, and it's
Yeah.
easy to memorize in a conversational narrative if the stuff sort of makes sense.
Mhm.
Even it's easier to memorize, but it was so bizarre the stuff that had to
Yeah.
be done in conjunction with, a mechanical puppet bat flying around the room, and then it would go fly. It was supposed to fly in the window, so they'd be outside the window, and then they'd have to like the puppeteer, who was a guy named Bill Baird, who was very famous in New York at the
Yeah.
time.
Sure.
He had to run around the set with his bat hanging from strings of a bamboo pole. With
Yeah.
it
You
was
were
hysterical.
uh a lot of the people watching the show, I mean, millions of kids were watching. You were the kind of the kid identification character for a lot of people. I mean, to this day, people are, they identify with David because he was their age, and
I
then
accept no responsibility for any bad things that happen as a result. None.
if you get possessed or try to take your father's bleeder valve out of his car,
Yes,
don't blame David.
fix the brakes.
Yeah. But then you went into your teens and they started putting you in the teen magazines. I remember there was an article with you collecting hats about your hat collection and all of this
Yeah,
kind of
I
thing.
did. I used to go. There were thrift shops all around the
Yep.
studio.
Yeah.
So all of the thrift shops in New York were on 9th Avenue, and it was cheap rent. And these were and hats were,
Yeah.
so exciting for me because you didn't find them very often. It was always involved a search and a
Yeah. Denise Nickerson said you went with her one time and
Denise.
she didn't get why you were thrifting. And at the time when she was a kid, she was like, let's go get new stuff. No.
Oh no, I remember competing with her for something in a case. It was a
Oh, yeah.
pocket watch, a little pocket watch or something broken, whatever. And I wanted it and she wanted it. I think she bought it, and I think I was miffed for a day that she
Were
he
were you
scooped me on something.
were you frustrated when, as the show went on, you became a teenager? I think you were 14 by the time you had left the show. Were you, but they, at some point, they were still kind of writing your part as more of a kid. Did you want to be more of like a teenage character in the show? I mean, you were, in some ways you were, like you'd
There was
tease.
another dynamic going on at that
Mm,
time.
mhm,
People probably don't remember as much or talk about it as much. The show's ratings used to be posted on a piece of paper near the elevator on a little bulletin board on the second floor.
mhm,
And I used to look and see when I saw that Gomer Pyle reruns
mhm.
were stronger than our show, it started to affect, I think, me. It was sort of, wow, we're like losing ground here. It was popularity showing off the air. It didn't go off the air because they ran out of storyline.
Mhm. Yeah, exactly. They could have
Right.
kept going. There were so many ideas they could have
No,
done. Yeah.
ABC lost faith in the show, and the show needed to refresh, and it couldn't be refreshed, and so no, I wasn't really worried about the evolution of the character.
Mhm,
It was just I was evolving, and the character was evolving, and
mhm.
I was doing different things, and um, there was no romance or romantic counterpart for David in the
I
show.
thought they were going to set that up with Kathy Cody's character, but she was a
She
little
was
older than you.
older too.
Yeah,
I
she was a
mean,
little older. Yeah,
yeah, she was
yeah.
also fun to work with. She was
Mhm.
we we had fun.
Yeah.
Also, I was lucky in that respect. The people that I got to work
Yeah.
with Sharon and Denise, and
Yeah.
I think Denise was the longest running.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But I was on the show for quite a long time from the beginning. I mean, I remember that I wasn't in the first episode, and that always sort of, wow,
Yeah.
I'm not really
Oh,
part of the
come on.
original team. Can you
Yes,
believe
you
it's not that?
are.
It's not.
You
No, of course I
are.
am. But I mean, but in those days, I was in episode
Yeah.
3,
Yeah.
not episode 1.
And
That was like,
Nancy wasn't in the very first episode either. It's Nancy Barrett, so she was great too. She is
oh
great.
yeah, she was a lot of fun. We had,
Yeah,
they
yeah.
all, that was part of my team. Nancy,
Alexander.
Alexandra and I were in contact through, because we lived in the same neighborhood in New York. I would
Mhm.
see her from time to time. But no, so there was no resentment or
Yeah,
complication about the
yeah.
lack
Le-
of evolution.
Yeah. Let me, and would you have come back would Dan have been able to talk you into coming back had they come back to the present day and with Roger and Elizabeth and
Oh,
everything?
absolutely would
Yeah.
have.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay.
I remember when I was in California, I used to be in contact with Dan. The show started rerunning, and
Hmm.
I used to, and the money thing, which is it's very, it's tragic. We were paid the least
Hmm.
as kids. We were paid the least, which is unfortunate. And when the show reran, the residuals were pathetic, and they would pay them like twice a year. And I was a young guy, not living hand to mouth. But I mean, I was working to support myself, and that money was interesting to me.
Yeah.
It was like pulling teeth to get
Yeah.
the check. And I used to call Dan's office quite a bit and say, like, the show's been running now 6 months. What is the rhythm for getting paid? I mean, how do we call AFTRA? The union didn't do anything to support us. It was pretty weak, and the
Yeah.
amounts were paltry,
Right. Yeah.
eh, embarrassing.
I've met Pat Priest who played Marilyn Munster, and she told me that they made all these Marilyn Munster dolls and figures and things like that, and she gets nothing from that. Any of the merchandising from any of that. Um, I know you got to go, so I want to ask you a couple of very quick questions here. I know Louis Edmonds used to go into your restaurant and introduce you as his son, which I
Yes.
think is wonderful.
Well, he used to introduce himself to the waiters as my father.
Oh, as your
That's
father?
the way it
Okay,
worked. Yeah,
okay, yeah.
yeah.
I love that.
He would arrive beforehand, and of course they all knew my mother. And Louis was a very flamboyant man
Mhm.
from another side of the spectrum entirely. So it was quite funny because he was
Yeah,
not shy
you're
about
right.
his lifestyle. So people said, "That's very interesting that you're in fact his father," because my father had been dead for 15 years by that time. So
Oh, okay. No, in the show Bible for Dark Shadows, in the show, it's implied that Burke Devlin might be David's father, but then that they kind of phase that out, and it's Roger's decidedly the father. I know fans debate this, so let's hear from David himself. Is Roger the father or is Burke the father?
that's really funny.
Yeah,
Uh, Burke at one point, I think, was sort of lost in the jungles of South America.
yeah, yeah. His plane went down
I,
and he
I have
died.
a I have a feeling that that was deliberate. That he was. I have no opinion,
No opinion. Okay.
no opinion. But I certainly I looked more like Roger.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So there we go. There we go. There's still a mystery, but there's a hint there. What do you think of the fact that the Dark Shadows fandom and people's enthusiasm for the show and new people finding there are all these like Generation Z fans that have a Dark Shadows Discord and they talk about the show and the characters and they're,
Good for them. Wonderful. I
yeah.
think it's great. I think
You,
it's a fun. It's a silly. It's a great thing to. It's all positive. There's nothing
yeah.
um, seamy or it's lovely. Seemly. It's just why not? It's fun.
It's fun.
And
That's
they get a kick out of it. And it was so flawed. It was so flawed and it's so human that makes it even more interesting.
yeah. But there's a heart to it, and it's just
Definitely.
and
No,
so
no, it
creative
definitely
and
had
fun.
soul. It had heart. It had heart. It took a lot of a heart to pull that off every day.
Wonderful. Well, David, I know you got to
Thank you
jump out of
very
here.
much for inviting me. It's been a real pleasure.
My goodness, it's been an absolute pleasure and an honor talking to you. And I want to wish you happy holidays to you and your family.
Well,
And
we're shooting
definitely listen.
early. We're taping this now. My family's coming. Everybody's coming to Panama for Thanksgiving.
Great.
So we will have all been together by the time this podcast is aired. Good luck. Thank you.
Oh,
Appreciate it.
my pleasure. And people can order online at lafapa.com, right? Oh, you ship
They
worldwide?
really can't. We don't ship overseas. It's strictly for the Panama market.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah, it is 100% local. Which is like a DoorDash situation. It's the same day delivery here. We have had people try to buy our chocolate online, and it's impossible.
Okay.
I'll let you know. We are this Christmas. We're going to be in some of our products will be in a store in Greenpoint, Brooklyn.
Oh, okay.
In a
Cool.
very, very spiffy, fun neighborhood, very chic, cool part
Great.
of Brooklyn right now between Greenpoint and Williamsburg. So I'll make sure everybody knows you can
Oh,
get some of our incredible handmade chocolates
great. And
there.
also let us know about your biography with Patrick McRae that you're working on, because
Oh, totally, totally.
that'll be definitely big news, and for
I don't
sure.
think it's going to be a commercial venture. I think it's going to be more of an act of love,
Absolutely
fun, and maybe be able to document some of the anecdotes that I've shared today. Give them a
wonderful.
little more. Okay, thank
All
you.
right. Bye, David. Thank you again.
Bye.
And I'm going to
Thanks.
hit stop. Terror at Collinwood is a Penny Dreadful production.